Okay, everybody, let's jump into the case of Cameron. So here we have Cameron's a 9-year-old boy with above average intelligence. So we have a resiliency factor there. His parents and teachers are worried a lot because of the onset of puberty and the impact it might have on his already volatile mood. So here he is, 9 years old, but his parents are already thinking down the road about how things might worsen, which is probably not a very good sign already. The only thing I would think about in those first couple of sentences is this phrase here of already volatile mood. So just as we don't quite know what that word mood means when we talk to parents, mood can describe just about anything, but some things we might want to mention just as potential differentials, right? When people talk about mood, they can mean anything, and especially when it's called volatile mood, we know that there's some sort of changes in mood. So this could be anything from maybe depression, this could be anger, which could go along with like irritability. So that's when I think of volatile mood, I'm thinking of kind of this idea of possibly depression, possibly anger and irritability. So let's continue on. But we know already that they're worried at age 9 that there's this volatile mood going on, and heaven knows that they've got a couple of few years or a couple of years before puberty starts to come on, and who knows what would happen there. So he is being referred to therapy at 9 years old, it appears, because of a several-year history of angry tendencies. So here we go. That's what it's, there we get some clarification then. So there's a several-year history of angry tendencies. So this is kind of the key right here, as well as a timeline. So we have at least, it sounds like at least 3 years of this kind of behavior, and the behavior appears to be something to do with anger, or anger tendencies, which could include aggressiveness, irritability, probably. So let's continue on. We have this going already. Some of the differentials, I've mentioned depression is kind of potentially one. There's always, at this point, there's always room to consider things that involve anger. There's things potentially such as ODD, conduct disorder. We could also do, it's a stretch, but we could also do something to the effect of bipolar. Certainly there's characteristics of irritability. There's also, along these lines, DMDD, the disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. So that's certainly something to consider. These are all the things that, as a clinician, when we're talking about anger or anger tendencies, these are some of the things that come to mind. Certainly, you would need to rule out ahead of time that there's no potentially intellectual disabilities, but we see that he's above average intelligence. It doesn't say anything indicating that there's any sort of autistic traits or things that we would need to also rule out. At least right now, it doesn't say that as far as possible autism kind of spectrum issues. So these are some of the things I'm at least considering right now, dealing with anger or angry tendencies. This just came to mind as well. There is the potential for children that have ADHD or ADD also to have some irritability, but we'll see how that plays out. Typically that's more so to do with kind of those behaviors of inattention as well as kind of restlessness. So here we go. Around age 6, Cameron showed signs of being somewhat hyperactive. So there we have kind of this idea of potentially early ADHD. He's age 6, so that would kind of about fit of when you would need to start to look at something like that. It even says he's restless and having a temper. So we have kind of some clues here of, hyperactive, restless. It's this portion here that, again, can sometimes be part of ADHD, but it's also something, again, this idea of temper that we need to consider as, where this goes. So it looks like he frequently would not follow the rules no matter what his parents attempted to do to persuade him. So let me just highlight that then, is that he would not follow the rules no matter what his parents attempted to do to persuade him. So there we have some clues, at least, of something else going on. So not following the rules, even though the parents seemed like they wanted to kind of do what they could to persuade him, nonetheless, he's not going along with it. Which with ADHD, typically it's a matter of them kind of not paying attention, or they get distracted, or they're just so rambunctious that they're just kind of not hearing. This seems to be that it's a little bit more than that he frequently would not follow the rules no matter what they did. So this is certainly, again, kind of more along the leanings than of potentially ODD and conduct type of issues. And again, this is age 6. So again, we have to take into account context and age, and is this typical, which at age 6, maybe. Cameron's parents are well educated, and in the beginning, his parents labeled his behavior as him simply being a stubborn child. So in the early beginnings, they kind of chalked it up to what I just said, which is this idea that maybe it's just 6 years old. He's not, he just doesn't want to obey. Cameron's parents were well educated, which is a good protective factor, and they attempted to implement strategies to cope with his stubbornness. So they even took the initiative to see what they could do to help his stubbornness, which, again, good for them. That's great. By age 8, so here we have kind of a timeline factor. So here we are 2 years later, and it says Cameron was increasingly irritable and touchy. So 2 years later, he still continues to be irritable and touchy when asked to do anything. Okay, so this is getting this kind of really this feel of defiance. He's touchy, he's irritable, even a simple task involving a reward. So which is kind of, again, interesting. Most kids, I would say, age 8, yeah, they're kind of maybe irritable to do anything, but, even when there's a reward in sight, it sounds like he is still even irritable and touchy. So that's kind of concerning there as well, and it's increasingly irritable. He would argue with his parents over just about anything. So here we have argue with his parents about anything that he was asked to do. And it looks like eventually the argument would end up in Cameron losing his temper and storming off to his room and slamming the door. So we have a couple of behavioral issues going on here as far as arguing with his parents. And what I see is key right here is over just about anything. So it's not just the fact that, maybe it's just, do your chores, but this key word of just about anything kind of lets us know that this is heading down somewhere to where it really has this feel of opposition. Again, this wouldn't, to me as a clinician, seem very typical of an ADHD child at this point. Again, yeah, there's some of these characteristics, but this constant argument or this arguing about anything, I don't know if I would say that's typical of ADHD, although those traits may certainly be there. That seems to be more along the lines now of ODD, or possibly conduct. Now, DMDD, I haven't mentioned that yet, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. The key criteria for that we need to look at is that there's mood going on, which we see some irritability and anger, but we're not necessarily seeing mood in other directions, such as kind of being crying or emotional or other things. Also, the main criteria is frequent and consistent temper tantrums and temper outbursts, kind of raging type of behavior. And that we haven't quite seen just yet. We've seen frequent arguing and refusing to do things. It says that he has lost his temper and stormed off, but we don't know if it's the frequency that it takes to be at DMDD, which is typically several times a week. So let's continue on. It says around the same period of time, his teacher reported that Cameron frequently bugged other students by kicking their chair or poking fun at their clothes. So in this case, I would say the behavior, if we look around, so here we also have what's important as his teacher. So we have kind of the second area of functioning now to this criteria. It's not just at home, it's not just his parents or the family structure. It looks like his teacher's reporting something similar, and his behavior then is frequently bugging others. Another word for bugging, could be something like annoying or bothering other students by kicking their chair or poking fun at their clothes. So this sounds like and the word frequent also lets us know that this is, to me at least, a pattern. This isn't just, he slipped and had a time where he kicked the chair. It sounds like it's a pattern of behavior, frequent pattern. Despite numerous warnings to stop that kind of behavior, this I would say would be important. We're talking about numerous warnings to stop. So obviously, there's this idea of not following rules. So the teacher has told him to stop, numerous warnings, and then it says Cameron would yell back to his teacher that you're not the boss of me, which is kind of a typical childhood response, right? You hear that quite a bit as parents, or if you're in a position where you're working with kids, you're not the boss of me. But it sounds like he's willing to yell back at his teacher. So at this point, we're probably seeing this pattern of he is willing to yell at his teacher, not follow the rules. It looks like that behavior has resulted in numerous trips to the principal's office for detention. So this isn't some one-off thing. This sounds like it's been happening throughout the school year, and numerous trips to the principal's office. And yelling back to a teacher, that's a big no-no. Again, I think it's one thing to be corrected maybe once or a couple of times, but when it seems to be numerous times or that he's yelled back, we can possibly assume that this has gone on for quite some time. So for me at this point, I'm not seeing anything as far as any sort of depression. I haven't seen the frequent temper outbursts that would be required for DMDD. ADHD, there are some traits. I'm just not kind of seeing this play out in the classroom as far as mentions of inattention or hyperactivity. Conduct disorder, again, at this point, it's a lot of verbal, it's a lot of irritability, it's temper. We're not necessarily seeing a lot of the conduct issues at this point required for conduct disorder, violations of other people's rights, damaging property, things like that, those type of behaviors, fighting. So let's continue on. It says, just recently, a female classmate accidentally spilled her drink in the cafeteria, and a small amount of it splashed on Cameron's clothes, to which he responded by opening his drink and pouring it over her food. So, Okay, so we have quite an event here that appears to be pretty disproportionate to what happened. So it looks like a small amount splashed on him, but his response then is to open his own drink and pour it all over her food. So you can imagine how that went down. It looks like when confronted by the cafeteria worker about why he did that to the other person's food, he said that it wasn't his fault and that his female classmate was the one who did it. So this is also kind of a key characteristic, is that he was confronted, and in the end he denies that it's his fault and he blames it on somebody else. So when I'm sure everybody around him saw that play out, and it sounds like even the cafeteria worker saw it play out, it's deny, 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 right? He kind of places the blame elsewhere. And finally, Cameron's parents are at a loss about what to do with their angry and disobedient son. So again, we have this mention of anger and disobedient. So let's go down these differentials really quick and take a look. We never really did see, with kids, sometimes depression comes out in some irritability. However, I wouldn't say we're not seeing any other classic signs of depression, any sort of isolation, schoolwork going down, social problems or isolation, crying, emotions, things like that, lack of enjoyment. So for me, depression is kind of out of the running. Conduct disorder, like I said, I really didn't see much as far as conduct disorder. Here I have my DSM with me. I'm not seeing necessarily bullying going on or initiating physical fights. He's more so bothering and annoying other people. I'm not seeing that he destroyed any sort of property or deceitfulness as far as theft or serious violation of rules. So I'm going to get rid of conduct disorder. Bipolar never really did manifest. We're not seeing any signs of impulsiveness or grandiose ideas or significant mood swings between depression and some sort of hypomanic behavior. So bipolar's out of the running. DMDD, as I said, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. I'm reading criteria A, and it talks about several recurrent temper outbursts manifested verbally and or behaviorally that are grossly out of proportion in intensity, inconsistent with the developmental level, and on average 3 or more times a week. So we've seen some instances of temper, but the degree that it's needed for disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, the frequency, that definitely would have to be mentioned here in order to get that to that level of DMDD. If that's the case, the DSM actually says that if it's DMDD, then a person really shouldn't receive a diagnosis of oppositional defiant because they are kind of so close. But in this case, we just don't really have meets the criteria for disruptive mood dysregulation. ADHD, again, we have traits that would need to be possibly ruled out or, provisional. He's got definitely some traits of some hyperactivity and restlessness, but we don't really see much more of a description. And we see that this is a pattern. It's been going on for at least a couple of years. It's followed him through what has probably been at least first grade through, which is now probably third grade, something to that effect, of not following the rules, arguing, all of those things. So this is my diagnosis after ruling out all of these things. I would call it then this is a pretty good case of ODD, which according to the DSM-TR, we're looking at F91.3. Now, as far as treatment, you definitely, in these cases of ODD, I don't do a lot of childhood therapy myself, and so what I would likely do is definitely refer them to either a marriage and family therapist who does family, especially child therapy, who works with family systems, or certainly an LCSW or another clinician who works with children and families. It is going to take getting the parents on board, working with both probably Cameron and the oppositional defiant, as well as the parents, of knowing how to reinforce and help certain behaviors, as well as working with his teacher. We would likely want to get her on board so that the same things are occurring at home and at school. We'll also certainly want to possibly or want to refer him to a pediatrician. That would certainly be appropriate to make sure there's nothing kind of physiologically going on or biologically going on, have a full health screening, and just make sure that we've ruled out anything that may be causing this type of mood. Who knows? Hormonal, blood disorders, who knows? So there we go. That would be my diagnosis, oppositional defiant disorder, and that is the case of Cameron. Very good.